The CDC very clearly says that mold growth inside of a building can cause human health problems. The CDC statement also says that it's not known if mycotoxin production inside of buildings can make people sick, and I think that's also something that we've thought all along. Most of the people that work in this area feel that mycotoxin production inside of buildings is extremely important and can cause human health problems, but it hasn't been clearly defined exactly what those health problems are.
Nobody's been able to maybe concrete, absolutely positively prove the cause and effect, but there's a preponderance of evidence building up of strongly suggesting that cause and effect out there.
The fact that the doctor could honestly say that they couldn't tell me, does that mean that it's not the mold? No. Too many people are jumping to that conclusion that it's not mold or it's not some other biological problem when they don't have the supporting evidence to say that. And maybe someday someone will be able to prove that it is or it isn't. But right now, all we can say is we have buildings where these people, when they're put into these buildings, have these reactions. When they're removed from these buildings and put into buildings that are cleaner and are void of some of these characteristics, they don't have these reactions. We've got to understand why.
Anytime we found a building that people were complaining of the phenomenon of sick building syndrome in, we almost invariably found water damage and resultant mold.
As far as health concerns, the complaints that we hear throughout the day from individuals are mainly related to nasal, really the spectrum is so wide, ranging from congestion, nasal congestion, all the way to memory loss.
You get sick more often, you feel lousy, you can't get out of bed, you got chronic fatigue feelings, you're hyperactive, you can't wake up, you can't go to sleep, you're always sniffling, whatever the symptoms are, fibromyalgia, vertigo, migraines, there's all kinds of number of reactions that each individual can have.
It's been well established that molds that grow in water-damaged environments produce some pretty nasty chemicals. A well-qualified physician can take a thorough history from a patient, look at any pre-existing conditions, look at the condition of the person before they were exposed to the mold, during the exposure, and after the exposure, and through a process of elimination, arrive at a well-reasoned decision as to what was probably the cause of a given health effect.
Most doctors haven't been trained or understand the role of exposures in how the body reacts.
Picking a physician to deal with a mold injury is an interesting issue. There are some physicians who see mold as the only cause of injury, and they're probably overreacting. There are other physicians who really aren't familiar with molds and don't know what to attribute to molds. So you need a physician who has a good science background and basically understands the issue from a middle-of-the-road perspective.
Toxicologists per se are not involved in patient care, so you really need to bridge that. You know, some toxicologist needs to work with the physician, and vice versa. The physician should work with toxicologists on certain issues.
I think the medical profession is certainly at a disadvantage. They did not learn much about this in medical school.
Well, a general practitioner is used to dealing with general problems, and if somebody comes in with a complaint about something that the general practitioner feels that he's on shaky ground with, he should act like any other professional and refer to somebody who is more specialized.
I think the allergenic and the pathogenic relationships are well accepted by most of the medical community. I've heard some dissension, but I think the majority of the medical and scientific community accepts those as possible medical consequences to exposures to mold.
Well, if anybody has allergies to, has hay fever, that's absolutely typical. Cold-like symptoms, some flu-like symptoms, anything to do with running noses, watery, itchy eyes, sore throat, difficulty breathing in some cases.
It's currently felt that approximately half of pediatric asthma is probably mold-related, so it is a major component of allergies.
Hypersensitivity pneumonitis is the example of is an example of a disease or a sickness that's associated with a chronic exposure.
Pneumonitis is essentially pneumonia. I've had it as a kid many times, but the hypersensitivity one is caused by mold exposure, and again, it's been connected with Aspergillus. And people develop a sensitivity, and then down the road, anything, even a smaller concentration, can set them off, and they can develop a pneumonia-like condition.
It can be fatal. It's a pneumonia. I mean, so it can be fatal just like any other pneumonia can be.
You'll have to come in contact with that mold several times in order to develop a hypersensitivity to it. But when that finally occurs, you may walk into a place that you've been many times before, and literally somebody may have to help you out.
It happens very quickly within a few hours after exposure. And they consider it possibly a toxic effect or possibly allergenic response, simply because they can't really explain it at this point, but it's probably more of an allergenic response.
Their own body has said enough. I won't be exposed to this anymore, and if you expose me to it, I'm going to really make you feel bad.
There was a study that came out of the Mayo Clinic that essentially said that 95 to 100% of all sinusitis is caused by fungal spores. We think of sinuses in the nasal cavities, and indeed what itis means is an inflammation of the sinuses. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean infection. An itis just means an inflammation. So you could have a high concentration of fungal spores inside of a sinus that's not actually causing an infection, but is causing, their presence are causing an inflammatory reaction inside the sinuses.
Respiratory infections, infections in the lung can be caused by mold. Aspergillosis, bronchitis caused by Aspergilla inhaled that start to grow in the lungs.
And one of the most common fungal infections in immunocompromised individuals is an Aspergillus infection. In fact, Aspergillus fumigatus is one of the more common fungal infections that you see in immunocompromised individuals.
And then the last major category is what we call poisoning or mycotoxicosis.
In terms of irritant toxic problems, probably the best knowledge and best science comes from the animal literature or in military-related research. What we know there is that some molds can produce very potent toxins called mycotoxins. There are many hundreds around. We probably don't know all of them that exist, but the ones that we know of are associated with irritant effects, simply speaking, on the skin, on the mucous membrane, or if they become systemically absorbed and the body interacts with that, it can cause effects in many, many directions. They can be immunotoxic, lowering the immune system, weaken the immune system. They can affect the alphabet of the makeup of the human, so to speak, the DNA and RNA, the genetic code. They can cause abortions. That has been observed in, like I said, animal situations. There are some case descriptions of women who aborted in very moldy environments. There have been not systematic studies on that, so I'm not saying it's generally accepted at this point, but clearly I would caution people or pregnant women about this. There's clearly animal studies in terms of exposing animals to these toxins that can go from simple skin irritation to reproductive problems to death.
Different people have different health risk tolerances to mold. It could be more damaging for some people than others. Each individual case would have to be evaluated.